Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to News Dose. And, I do understand that the news has been a little bit slow here recently. I do expect that to change come August with Gamescom. That should be a fun time. Do make sure to subscribe as we head into that event. That way you'll be notified every time we get a new update. But yes, Nintendo and PlayStation have mostly been silent. And thankfully, the one consistent service always seems to be Xbox Game Pass. I've said it before, and I'll just say it again here. But Game Pass, they just know how to deliver interesting games on a monthly basis. And right on cue, we got some new Game Pass topics to talk about today. Not only for a game that's slated for an August release, I think some of you all will be fairly happy about that announcement, but also for one of 2025's most refreshing and most exciting games, which, yes, will also launch directly into Game Pass day one. You just absolutely gotta love it, so do stay tuned for all of that. And then we'll also talk about Ubisoft and their next big game, Star Wars Outlaws. I know there's been some skepticism around that game, which, hey, I don't blame people for being skeptical. There's definitely some trust issues when it comes to Disney's version of the Star Wars IP, and gamers don't exactly trust Ubisoft either. So the combination of the two certainly plants some doubt, I'd have to say. But is there a chance that they could actually come out and prove everybody wrong? Because right now, it kind of sounds like they just might. So we will get into all of that as well, but before we do, let's just go and get into our first topic of the day, being about Visions of Mana. This is the first brand new Mana game in over 15 years. As hard as that might be to believe, this is such a legendary JRPG franchise that probably shouldn't have been as underutilized as it's been. But that's finally going to change next month. And I mean, if you're just tired of waiting by this point, or maybe you just want to see what all the excitement is about, well, Square Enix has you covered because they just dropped a free demo that you can play ahead of its full release, which is on August 29th. The demo is available on Xbox, PlayStation, and Steam. And the cool thing here is that the demo also differs from the main game. From how they're describing it, it will offer some unique content, and then on top of that, as a reward, you'll also receive 3 exclusive weapons that you can take over to the full release if and when you buy it. So that's a pretty cool incentive, and this is something that Square Enix has done a really good job with throughout this generation. They typically drop these free demos that can carry over to the full release in some shape or form, and that's what we're seeing here. It's just a great way to reward players who are already invested in a game, as well as for players who are maybe on the fence. Again, though, the demo is available right now as we speak, so make sure to download it as soon as you can. Now, we also got an update for the Resident Evil 4 remake, and I just love hearing things like this. I think Capcom has been killing it with their games. I consider them the golden standard for big-time developers right now, and I like when we see quality get rewarded. It's just a nice feeling. And Resident Evil 4 Remake has definitely been rewarded. It has now officially sold 7.6 million units worldwide, and that's kind of the thing here because it is still selling. This game is only a year old by this point, so it will continue to grow as we've seen from past Resident Evil entries. I mean, as a franchise, they've now sold more than 160 million copies worldwide, which is honestly crazy to think about when you talk about a horror franchise. But the Resident Evil series is just kind of on its own plateau. For as impressive as the numbers are for Resident Evil 4, though, it's actually still not even in the top 5 best-selling Resident Evil games. Resident Evil 2, 5, 6, 7, and Village are actually all still ahead of it. I think that kind of says a lot about this series, but it'll definitely be interesting to see if Resident Evil 4 can track those games down in the long run. But I think this also kind of tells you why Capcom has gone full steam ahead with these remakes. These games have been absolutely huge for them, and I think now the question just kind of becomes, what's next? Are they going to remake Resident Evil 5? Are they going to try Code Veronica? Or could they go in a completely different direction with some Dino Crisis remakes? That would be pretty cool, but at the end of the day, I really just hope that they remake them all. If anything else, I'd say I think this is a pretty good sign that they will get to each one of those games eventually. As long as they put up these type of numbers, it's really just a no-brainer for Capcom to keep remaking games. Okay, so let's go talk about Xbox Game Pass. And we actually have two different things happening here. So I'll first start off with the August news. Typically, they announce games in waves, but in this case, they dropped one announcement a little ahead of time, and that's for Mafia Definitive Edition. So the rumors were 100% true, and I have to really give credit to Ecstasis TV. He's kind of proven himself here recently with various accurate leaks, and he was dead on the money with this one. Mafia is slated for an August 13th Game Pass launch, and I think this is a fairly good inclusion. This is a big AAA remake that's been out for a few years, but it's not necessarily so big that everybody's played it. There's still a lot of people out there that hasn't tried this series, and this could be their introduction. There are still other Mafia games that aren't included in Game Pass, such as Mafia 2 Definitive Edition and Mafia 3. So this is a great way to boost this series. If you like the first, you can go ahead and jump into those games as well. And if you haven't already played them, they're often compared to the GTA series, but set in the 1930s and the 1960s. So if that sounds interesting to you, again, definitely check this game out come August 13th when it launches into Xbox Game Pass. The game that I'm personally more excited about, though, is a game that's releasing in the Game Pass next year, Expedition 33. This was revealed at, I believe it was the Xbox Summer Showcase, and for as good as a showcase as they had, I said it back then, but I thought Expedition 33 was one of their best highlights, which is, that's saying a lot considering everything that they had to show. There's just not a lot of games that you see like this, and I think PlayStation understands that as well. Yes, Xbox got the Game Pass deal, that's huge for them, but PlayStation, they got an exclusive interview with the studio that's working on Expedition 33, which tells me that, yeah, they probably see how special this game can be as well. They want to highlight that it's also coming over to PlayStation. They posted this interview over on their website, and I thought this was really interesting. The studio had this to say: there hasn't really been any attempt at making a turn-based RPG with high-fidelity graphics for a good while, and that left a deep hole in my gamer heart. We took it upon ourselves to make something to fill that void. And I started to think about that, and yeah, they are 100% correct about this. I think that's probably one of the reasons that this game stands out so much. If you look at something like the Final Fantasy franchise as one such example, a lot of its longtime fans have been pleading for Square Enix to make a new turn-based game, as they're not necessarily happy with its more action-driven focus with its recent entries. But that's kind of the thing. It seems like once publishers start to get into that AAA territory, they start to believe that turn-based games limit their reach too much. They believe that action games are easier to sell to that mass audience. So when we see turn-based games anymore, for the most part, they're for smaller scale games, unless you're Baldur's Gate 3, which was actually one of the best selling games last year. I'm just going to go and throw that out there. But Expedition 33 is kind of unique in the sense that we don't see turn-based JRPGs like this with these AAA visuals. It looks very impressive. But continuing on here, they also said at Sandfall Interactive, we all have love for JRPGs like Final Fantasy, the Tell series, Lost Odyssey, and Persona with its awesome UI, rhythm, and dynamic camera. We all have a lot of nostalgia and love for these kinds of games, but also want to see something fresh done with the genre. I kept thinking about ways to make turn-based battles more engaging. The attack rhythm system is a mix of different inspirations. We wanted to make something fast-paced to fit the vision we had for battle. As soon as I finished the first prototype of the defense system, I knew it was something special. And that's the word that I keep hearing in reference to Expedition 33. I think we all see it. Now, I think it's hard to say if it will meet that expectation, but it's clear that there's a lot of potential with this game, and it does 100% look special. Xbox sees it, and that's why they went out and they snagged the Xbox Game Pass deal. PlayStation sees it, and that's why they're highlighting it here. They want to showcase that it's also coming over to PlayStation, and that's also why so many JRPG fans are just so excited by its reveal trailer, because we see the potential that it put on display. For that matter, the fact that they mentioned Lost Odyssey as one of its main inspirations, I think that there is a very good sign. That's the game that it does remind me most of, and I've said it for years. I think Lost Odyssey is secretly one of the best Final Fantasy games that exists, which also means that it's one of the best JRPGs of all time. Though I will say, they also mentioned the Souls games as an inspiration. That one surprised me a little bit more, but the way they kind of explained it is that they want to bring that rewarding gameplay over to a turn-based RPG because they want players to meticulously learn attack patterns. Nonetheless, though, this game looks incredible. It's by far one of my most anticipated games right now, and I just kind of hope that it plays as good as it looks. Okay, now one last thing before we go. We got some early previews for Star Wars Outlaws, and I'm not going to talk about this one for too long just because I think that it's better to watch the previews yourself. That way you can get more specific details. But one thing that I can tell you is that from most of the previews that I've seen, they seem fairly positive, and that's notable considering the amount of skepticism that surrounds this game. Again, I can't necessarily blame anybody for being skeptical. I am as well. Ubisoft has a very specific formula that they like to mimic in their open world games, and there is that curiosity. Is this just yet another Far Cry game with a Star Wars coat of paint? Is this just going to be more of the same? And right now, it sounds like that's a no. These previews seems to be based on about 4 to 5 hours of gameplay, so we're still going to learn a lot more with the full reviews when it releases next month, but from how it's being described, most previews came away impressed and said that it feels like a legitimate Star Wars universe experience. And I think that's exactly what fans want. I mean, there's been a lot of Star Wars games, but because Outlaws is an open world game, it can offer a more authentic experience into its vast universe. It's kind of similar to Hogwarts Legacy in that way. This is something that fans have wanted for a very long time, and it sounds like, or at least in these previews, that they executed that fairly well. So this is a positive sign at the very least. But at the same time, I think it's also important to note that we have seen positive previews for other games in the past, and then reviews came around and then critics took a complete 180. Redfall is a great example of that. I remember early previews being mostly positive for that game as well, and we all kind of know how that turned out. So if you're cautious about Outlaws, what I would say here is that you should probably still hold off on a pre-order until we hear something a little bit more definitive. But in the meantime, definitely go check out those early previews if you are indeed interested. Anyways, though, that's going to be it for this episode. But until next time, hit that subscribe button and peace out.